Yes, great. Dana, great
Hello.
to yes, great to great to meet you. We've chatted virtually online a few times,
Yeah.
and looking very much forward to this topic. And a quick introduction. Uh, Dana lives in Nyack and is a consultant by trade, a co-founder of the Nyack Pollinator Pathway, a native plant gardener, enthusiast, and an advocate for increased pollinator habitat across both public and private land. Dana has traveled extensively, lived in 3 countries, and currently splits her time between New York and the desert of Baja California, Mexico. So
Yes.
thanks for being in New York and Nyack, and I'll leave it up to you, and thanks very much.
Okay, great. Well, thanks, you guys. It's really nice to be here today. I was going through my presentation. I'll share my screen in a second, but I was realizing that the interests of the Water Quality Committee and the interests of the Nyack Pollinator Pathway are very much aligned. I mean, a lot of the best practices for improving water quality are also some of the best practices for helping pollinators. So, even though our focuses are a little bit different, our circles, definitely overlap. So, let me share my screen. Let's see. Okay, can everybody see that?
Yes.
All right, great. So, yeah, hi, once again, I'm Dana. I'm going to be talking today about pollinator pathways, what they are, why we create them, and some things that all of us can do to help pollinators in a post-wild world. My goal with all of this is that all of us get out there and start, unpaving the way. So I will start by telling you a little bit about the Nyack Pollinator Pathway. I am one of the co-founders, and we were founded in 2019. Our mission is to improve and enhance pollinator habitat on both public and private land all throughout the Nyacks. So essentially what we do is we look for underutilized natural spaces and we turn them into pollinator gardens. We are 100% volunteer run. We are a 501c3 nonprofit, so if anyone is so inclined, donations made to us are tax deductible. And I'll show you some of our projects, a few of our planting projects later on in the presentation. But in addition to creating pollinator gardens, we also do a lot of education on ecologically beneficial gardening practices. We talk to organizations such as you guys all over Rockland County and regionally. Orange and Rockland is one of our big sponsors. So yeah, I'm very proud of the work that the Pathway does. To get started, let's all do a quick review from high school biology class. What are pollinators? Pollinators are lots of different species, but a lot of insect species are pollinators. So bees, butterflies, beetles. You'll find a lot of letter B alliteration in pollinator species, but also moths, wasps, ants. In other species, birds are great pollinators. Bats are very important pollinators. There's even some amphibians that are pollinators. So essentially, any creature that gets on a plant and moves pollen around so that that plant can reproduce is a pollinator. And pollinators are not only important because they pollinate a lot of the plants that become food that we eat, but pollinators are important because they pollinate about 90% of all flowering plants. I mean, they're out there pollinating basically every plant that flowers. And of course, we need plants. They're the basis of all life. Without plants, we don't have things like clean water and clean air and healthy soil. So the services that these creatures provide to us are really essential. We can't live without them. We want their populations to be not just surviving, but thriving. We want them to be in really, really healthy populations. But unfortunately, The opposite is happening. Pollinator populations across the board are dwindling. We're in the middle right now of a global insect apocalypse. Insect populations are declining all over the world. And right now there are about 1 million animal and plant species that are currently facing extinction. So clearly all of these creatures are not getting what they need. So what do pollinators need? They really just need two things. They need native plants on which to forage, and they need natural spaces to complete their life cycles. So native plants are plants that evolved in a particular area. So if we're talking about a plant that is native to the northeastern US, we mean a plant that evolved in the northeastern US. And because these plants evolved here, they have symbiotic relationships with other pollinators and other wildlife that also evolved here. And those relationships are very multi-layered and they're very important. So native plants, for instance, are the plants that our native pollinators recognize as food, or they're the plants that blossom at a particular time of year when a certain pollinator is just emerging from winter and really needs to find some food, or when a particular pollinator is just coming back from migration and really needs to find some food, or they're host plants, like for butterflies. So butterflies know they can lay their eggs on these particular plants, and then when those eggs become caterpillars, the caterpillars can eat that plant. So native plants are important in a variety of ways. Another way that they're super important for water quality is that native plants don't only have symbiotic relationships with other wildlife, but they also have symbiotic relationships with soil microorganisms. So when you plant native, you are improving your soil health, which in turn improves your water quality. So native plants are important for pollinators for all of these reasons. And then natural spaces, again, pollinators are lots of different species. They all have different life cycles. So whether, they all make their nests differently. So by natural spaces, I just mean either the particular plants or the trees or access to soil, or maybe it's leaf litter, whatever it is that these pollinators need to create their nests and have their babies and raise their next generations. So if you're following along, maybe you're thinking, okay, so pollinators are in crisis, but they need these two things. So let's just tick these things off the list. We'll start with the first one and we'll go down to the Home Depot and buy some native plants for our pollinators. I wish it was that easy, but unfortunately it's kind of not. Most of the plants that are sold in our regular retail and certainly big box nurseries are not native. About 80% of the plants that are sold in regular nurseries come from other countries, other parts of the world, and they have very, very little to no ecological value. And this isn't some big conspiracy. It has to do, the reasons for this have to do with how the commercial nursery industry evolved. When the retail nursery industry was getting its start many decades ago, nurseries made their money by selling plants that were exotic, plants that people had never seen before. At the time, people didn't really want to spend money on plants that you could, and still in many instances, just take a shovel and go dig up from the woods at the end of the road. They wanted to see something new and something different. So nurseries started importing plants from all over the world and propagating those plants and then disseminating them out into our landscapes. And unfortunately, that's the practice that just still continues today. The other thing that's very unfortunate about the nursery industry is that there's very little oversight in it. So nurseries still sell a lot of invasive plants. And any of you that are gardeners know that the fight against invasives is continuous and never ending. So when you take a plant from another part of the world and you bring it to a different part of the world where it didn't evolve, and it's no longer surrounded by those particular, those other plants and animals that it did evolve with that keep its populations in check, sometimes those plants can then start to spread uncontrollably. And they take over natural spaces and they outcompete all of the other species. They reduce biodiversity, they disrupt nutrient cycling. So as I think all of you know, on the Water Quality Committee, they can have a real direct negative effect on water quality as well. And a lot of these plants are still being sold in nurseries. The picture on the bottom right is burning bush. It's a big problem here in the Northeast. So if you want to find native plants for pollinators, you oftentimes have to seek them out from a native plant nursery. Okay, but what about the second thing on the list? Natural spaces. I mean, surely we still have enough, of our prairies and our plains, our forests, wetlands, woodlands, all of that. Don't we still have enough of that in our national parks, our state parks, for pollinators to have what they need? And the truth is, we just don't. This slide has a lot of scary statistics for you, but over the past several hundred years, the last 100 years especially, we've really lost a lot of our natural spaces and a lot of our biodiversity. Since 1950, our population here in the US has more than doubled. The forests that were here several hundred years ago, our indigenous forests, when the settlers first started arriving, 90% of those forests are now gone. Urban development continues to claim about 2 million acres every year. 2 million acres is the size of Yellowstone National Park. We're losing a Yellowstone National Park to development every year. And now, of the lower 48 states, 54% of that land area is cities and suburbs. And then another 41% is industrialized agriculture. And as you know, industrialized agriculture is not a biodiverse environment. It is really just one crop planted for as far as the eye can see. So that means that 95% of all those ecosystems that were here and were functioning several hundred years ago have now been totally disrupted. So we're at a breaking point, and this is why pollinator populations are dwindling. So what happens if we do nothing? This slide just about sums it up. Now, this was actually, it was a bumper sticker that I had on an old car, and it's meant to be lighthearted. But the message here is true. We really need these species to survive. They are essential to us. But how do we reconcile what our landscape looks like now with the needs of pollinators? Because there is no going back. There's no way that we're going to make our landscape look like it did in 1600, ever again. But I find a lot of inspiration in this quote. The task that faces us now is not to mourn what is lost, but to open our eyes to see the spaces that surround us every day. Our yards, roads, office parks, malls, woodlots, parks, and cities, because we have the natural spaces already that we can use to support pollinator species. And a huge, huge portion of them is our yards, our private properties. This is where we can make the most difference for pollinators the most quickly. Any of us could go to a native plant nursery today and buy a bunch of plants to create a pollinator garden. If all of us did this, pollinator problems would be solved. But it is not only our private properties where we can make a difference. It's also a lot of other spaces. It's spaces like the green space around office buildings or other commercial properties. I mean, who says this has to be turf grass and boxwood bushes? These can be pollinator gardens. It's roadsides. There's 2 million miles of roadsides in the US. That's an awful lot of space, and roads are natural conduits, so they could be great for some of our migrating pollinator species. It's spaces like city parks. I mean, city parks are a no-brainer. They are already primed for increased pollinator habitat. It's utility landscapes. So these are spaces like electric transmission corridors or solar arrays or gas pipelines. I mean, a lot of these spaces are just wide open natural spaces that can't be allowed to become overgrown. In many cases, they're just being mowed. These would be perfect for more pollinator habitat. Spaces like cemeteries, these are also like wide open natural spaces that could have increased pollinator habitat. It would be beautiful. It's even spaces like golf courses. I mean, I know you think like, oh, wait, what about the herbicide use at golf courses, all the turf grass? Golf courses have wide swaths of out-of-play areas. They have staff that is already trained in land management. There is a lot of potential in golf courses. We can get really creative with where we choose to put pollinator habitat. I took this picture the last time I was in London. Now, look, we don't have to get this crazy. And obviously, there are going to be spaces that won't be right for more pollinator habitat for whatever reason. My point with all this is simply that there are so many spaces that are. And I've found that when we go through the effort of creating these pollinator gardens, not only are we helping pollinators, in a post-wild world, but we are also, most of the time, creating some pretty incredible, enjoyable, wonderful spaces for us too. So this slide is a picture of the High Line. If you haven't visited it already, it's in New York City. I highly recommend it. It is a public park that was created out of an old raised train railway in the dense urban environment of downtown Manhattan. It's incredibly inspiring. And it's also a great example of a pollinator pathway. So I've talked so far about the why of pollinator pathways, why it's important to create them, but now I'll talk a little bit about the what. So what are pollinator pathways? They're really exactly like they sound. So they're either a literal corridor, a road, or just a group of public and private properties that provide native plant habitat and nutrition for pollinators. So we're designing these spaces to connect pollinator species in urban areas with the resources that they rely on to survive. So how do they look in real life? So IRL, pollinator pathways usually look in one of two ways. So these are two different images. The image on the left is a literal suburban street. That's a suburban street in Seattle, Washington. And it connects two existing green spaces. I think the green space in the bottom of that image is a small public park, and then the green space at the top is a small community college that had a lot of green space. So in that instance, all of the neighbors on this street in Seattle, they all got together and they all replanted their front yards, and they planted them with a bunch of native pollinator-friendly plants. So now pollinators can move with ease up and down this street to get from one of those existing green spaces to the other. So this is a great way to create a pollinator pathway. I mean, 2 thumbs up, gold star, 5 stars, absolutely awesome. But you don't have to create a literal pathway. You can just try to get an overall increase throughout a given area of increased pollinator habitat. So the image on the right is an example of that. So the image on the right is a map of the township of Newcastle. They're over in Westchester. And the green spaces on the map are either public or private properties in Newcastle that have gotten on the pathway, that have planted more pollinator-friendly native plants in their yards, on their properties, so that pollinators can, move with ease throughout, all of these different little pollinator islands. This is also a perfectly legitimate, great way to create a pollinator pathway. 2 thumbs up, gold star, 5 stars. Pollinators don't necessarily fly in straight lines anyway. So this is also the model that we're following in the Nyacks. We're just looking to do, an overall increase in pollinator habitat wherever we can get it throughout a given area. as much as I would love to take credit for the idea behind pollinator pathways, it is not my idea. This is a worldwide movement. There are lots of different organizations all over the world that are doing this same thing. These are just a few that I pulled off of a simple Google search. You can see they go by different names, Pollinator Passage, Butterfly Highway, Beelines, et cetera, but they're all doing the same thing. We're looking to connect pollinator species with the resources that they need to live. So if you're following along and thinking this sounds great, what can I do? How can I get on a pathway? The very best thing that you can do to help pollinators is to go native and plant native plants on your property. I talked a little bit before about what's important about native plants. That these are the plants that contribute to ecosystems. You know, on the whole, native plants contribute about 29 times more to local ecosystems than do non-native plants. When you bring a plant from another part of the world to a plant where it hasn't evolved, it doesn't have those same relationships with the other pollinators and wildlife that is there, so it doesn't contribute in the same way. Some of the things that native plants do specifically for water quality, you know, their root systems help recharge groundwater systems. They filter pollutants and reduce runoff and improve soil structure. So they're very, very important for a lot of reasons. One of the reasons that I also like to talk about just as a gardener is that native plants, you know, because they originated here, they understand all of our, for instance, weather patterns, soil types, microclimates. And that means that once you plant them and once they get established, they require very little care. So over time, that saves you money. And as a gardener, it makes you look good because your plants start to thrive because they understand where they're planted. They don't need to be babied. They don't need to be wrapped up for winter or your soil amended or, you know, anything like that. Native plants are like, you know what? I'm from here. I got this. So I love planting plants that make me look great as a gardener. But again, the main reason that we plant native is because of what they contribute to ecosystems. So I'm going to give you an example of how important this is. This is a Kusa dogwood. Cornus Kusa is the botanical name. It is a beautiful tree. It's not native. It's from China. But this tree is planted prevalently throughout the US. I mean, there's a couple of Kusa dogwoods on my street alone. So this tree supports no species of butterflies or moths. There are no butterflies or moths that can forage or make habitat on this tree, none. Whereas this is our native flowering dogwood, Cornus florida. This is a native tree. This tree supports 118 different species of butterflies and moths alone. 118 different species. And that's just butterflies and moths. That's not even counting all the other pollinator species that it supports. So you can see the difference between native and non-native and how much native plants contribute to ecosystems. And the other thing I like to point out here is that when you plant native, you're not sacrificing anything in terms of aesthetics. You know, the Kusa dogwood is a beautiful tree, but the flowering dogwood, our native flowering dogwood, is also a beautiful tree. But this tree is contributing to ecosystems, whereas the Kusa dogwood is ecological blank space. So another thing that you can do to help pollinators around your yard, your private property, is to consider pollinators nesting and overwintering sites. So there are a lot of pollinators that make their nests in the ground. So having some patches of bare earth around your property is not necessarily a bad thing. It allows pollinators a little bit easier access to the soil. I'm not saying, not have any coverage, but, just some patches of bare earth can actually be really beneficial to pollinators. Not everything needs to be covered in turf grass or mulch. Another great thing to do is to leave your perennials to stand during the winter. Like, don't do a fall cleanup, don't cut them back. A lot of those seed heads of your perennials that have died back for the winter, those seed heads become food for birds during the winter. Other pollinators, there's a lot of other pollinators that make their nests in wood of some kind. So if you have any dead trees on your property, leaving up dead trees is actually a really beneficial thing to do. There's so many different species that will move into a dead tree and start breaking it down. Or if you need to take down a tree, leave the stump. Don't dig out the stump, because again, there's a lot of pollinators that can make their nests in that stump. Or if you don't have dead trees or stumps on your property, another great thing to do is to create a brush pile. If some of your tree limbs, when they fall naturally, rather than getting rid of all that garden debris, you can just pile it on your property, in a certain place, and that becomes shelter for wildlife. A lot of different bee species, can create their nests in there. It's a really great thing to do, to have a little brush pile. Now, I've had complaints before about, like, well, how do I make a brush pile, not be ugly on my property? And there are ways to do this. You can really turn a lot of your garden debris into into sculpture. These are some pictures from another nonprofit called the Perfect Earth Project. They're a nonprofit that's focused on natural and non-toxic land management practices. But they had a lot of great photos on their website that are really inspirational, things that you can do with a lot of this garden debris, a lot of these things that fall down, these branches that fall down during storms. You can create these little sculptural and beautiful and beneficial places for pollinators. It doesn't have to be unsightly. Another great thing to do for pollinators is leaving your leaves. And I want to talk about this issue in particular because there's more nuance with this subject. And this is a subject that I think has, there's some thought about how fall leaves negatively affect water quality. And I kind of want to go over this subject in particular to kind of explain the different ways that we can make fall leaves work for us. I'm sure all of you have heard, this expression, leave your leaves, or in Nyack, we have a campaign called Love 'em and Leave 'em. And what it means is just don't blow your leaves down to the curb for the town to take away. Don't bag them, don't get rid of them, just leave them where they fall. And these are cute little sayings, leave your leaves, love them and leave them. They're very catchy and they're very memorable, but there's more nuance to this. So I want to explain more. First of all, the reasons why it's important to leave your leaves, there's several. One of the main ones is that there is no better fertilizer for your soil than fall leaves. There is nothing you can buy that is better for your soil than decomposing fall leaves. This is how Mother Nature intended it. When trees lose their leaves in the fall, they're not throwing them away. They're not trying to, get rid of them. They're placing them on the soil so that those leaves decompose and enrich the soil in which they grow. The other thing that's very important about fall leaves is that there are so many pollinators that spend at least some of their life cycle in leaf litter. So there's some pollinators that will lay their eggs on fall leaves, and then when they fall, those pollinators will overwinter in the leaf litter. The other thing about leaf litter is as it's decomposing, it forms this layer of decomposing leaves and other natural material and moisture. It's right on top of the soil, and it's called the duff layer. And the duff layer is very important for keeping moisture in the soil, as well as for, it's also very thermoregulated. So there are a lot of insects that will overwinter in that duff layer. A lot of insects like bumblebees and fireflies. So, if you want more bumblebees and more fireflies in your yard, then it's great to not get rid of your fall leaves. When you get rid of all those leaves, you're getting rid of all those pollinators. But I've heard people say, well, I can't leave all these leaves on my grass because it will kill my grass, or I can't leave leaves on hardscapes because then they get wet with the rain and slippery and it's dangerous. So some of the things that you can do with your fall leaves rather than getting rid of them is you can rake your fall leaves into your perennial beds. That's one of the best things to do. Fall leaves are not only great fertilizer, but they are also a great mulch. They allow water to percolate into the soil rather than rush over it. So that is number one, the best thing you can do. Just rake them into your perennial beds. Or if you have space on your property, you can also rake your leaves into one big pile on your property and just allow them to slowly biodegrade. That's also a great, great thing to do. A couple of inches, like an inch or two of fall leaves on your grass will not kill it, but several inches of leaves will. One option for this is you could mulch mow leaves. Most lawnmowers have a mulch option, or a mulch attachment. So you can just run your lawnmower over the leaves that mulches them up, and mulched leaves decompose very quickly. But I tend to advise that as just a last resort. Do mulch them if you have to, because if you mulch your leaves, you're losing those pollinators. And then on hardscapes, I either blow my leaves into my perennial beds or rake my leaves from my hardscapes into my perennial beds. You don't want leaves to clog storm drains. With our more urban environments, a lot of leaves in the water I know that's caused issues with a lot of nitrogen and phosphorus getting into the water, essentially more nutrients than the water needs getting into the water. So yeah, you want to, wherever possible, keep those leaves from getting into storm drains or washing anywhere else. I advise people, think of your leaves as a resource. Just like the water that falls on your property, think of that as a resource. How can you keep it? How can you keep that resource and utilize it around your property? The other thing about getting rid of fall leaves is that, that leaf pickup that our townships do, it costs our towns tens of thousands of dollars to go around and pick up fall leaves every year. So it's a lot more cost effective for our towns, the fewer leaves that need to be picked up. Another thing that you can do to help pollinators is reducing your lawn. And I used to, this slide used to be labeled lose your lawn. And certainly if you're interested in losing all of your turf grass and turning it into meadow, I applaud you. I'm your biggest fan. But you don't have to do that. I understand completely how daunting it can seem to get rid of your lawn in entirety. I live on a third of an acre and I have a lot of lawn. So I understand, because like if I tried to lose all of it all at once, that would be overwhelmingly expensive. And I also want to stay married, so instead what I'm doing is I am chipping away at my lawn, and I'll show you some examples of that on the next slide. The issue with lawns, it's not that turf grass doesn't have its place. Public parks, soccer fields, things like that, there is nothing better than turf grass. But we have so much turf grass, so much lawn here in the US. We've got about 40 million acres. That's roughly the size of the state of Texas. and about 80% of it just isn't being used at all. And the amount of water and herbicide and fertilizer that is put on lawns every year is absolutely immense. All those chemicals just go into our water table. So they're inherently quite wasteful. And they're an ecological desert. You know, this is not native species, native grass species in turf grass. There are no pollinators that can forage or complete their life cycle in a turf grass lawn. So they're not really contributing anything ecologically. But they are pretty and they do serve a purpose, you know, in some instances. So if you don't want to lose your entire lawn, just consider reducing it. So these are some examples of reduced lawns. Essentially, what you're doing is expanding your perennial beds. If you have perennial beds around your house, just make them bigger, you know, eat up several more feet of lawn, expand them into your lawn. If you've got a big lawn, you can create a big center island, you know, perennial bed, just make a little natural shape and create a big pollinator garden in the middle of your lawn. You can create pollinator gardens around your downspouts of your house or around your mailbox. There's lots of different ways that you can do this. Kind of like what I said at the beginning, if everybody made an effort to reduce their lawn and plant more native pollinator-friendly plants, it would solve so many problems for pollinators. There's a great quote on this slide from a ecological horticulturalist named Rebecca McMacken. She's from Brooklyn. She makes a lot of presentations. She's done a TED Talk. I'm really crushing hard on her right now. But she says lawns should be area rugs, not wall-to-wall carpet, which I think is quite brilliant. She's also said before, everyone can have a little bit of lawn as a treat. So think about how you can make your lawn, you know, more like an area rug, more like a little treat, you know, rather than a complete wall-to-wall carpet. And I don't think I need to spend a lot of time on this slide. I'm probably preaching to the choir. But yes, one of the best things you can do for pollinators is not to use pesticides. Yeah, I won't spend a lot of time on this. The only thing I'll say is that pesticides are an umbrella category. They encompass insecticides, herbicides, and fungicides. And even some of those products that are relatively benign for pollinators, their combined effects, like if a pollinator encounters more than one on a foraging trip, which is pretty easy for them to do, those negative effects can become exponential. So wherever, however, you know, possible, just avoid using these products altogether. I feel like there's an organic solution to every pest problem. Now, if you already do a lot of these things and you live anywhere close to the Nyacks or in the Nyacks, I invite you to please join the Nyack Pollinator Pathway. We have an interactive map on our website. You can add your address to the map, tell us how many native plants that you have on your property, and you can get a rating of either a pollinator pit stop or a pollinator B&B, or our highest rating, a pollinator 5-star hotel. So I encourage all of you to go for gold and add your address to our map. If you do, I'll bring you a sign to put in your yard and make all your neighbors jealous. Our hope with this map is that as more and more people join, we'll eventually be able to look at the map and just see a sea of green dots of all the different properties that have become stops along the pathway. The power to affect ecological change, it really is in our hands. I'll show you some of the projects that the Nyack Pollinator Pathway has worked on or that I've just worked on myself. This is my backyard. So this is something that I've done personally. I live on a hill, and so my backyard is essentially a hillside. In the before picture there, that house at the top is my neighbor's house. That entire hillside below his house is our backyard. When we first bought the house, it was covered in invasive species. Now, over several years, I've slowly turned it into pollinator garden. And it is just amazing the amount of pollinators I discover up there. I just really love spending time out there. This is one of the projects that the Nyack Pollinator Pathway did. This is the entrance to the community garden on Franklin and Depew in Nyack. So this is a great example of reducing your lawn. You can see how in front of the community garden fence was just turf grass. We, carved out, we took out a lot of that turf grass, created a big pollinator garden there right in front of their fence. It's just to the right of their entrance. This garden has done so well that they asked us to come back and do the other side of their entrance. So now both sides, going into the community garden is just a lovely pollinator garden. It attracts a lot of pollinators to everybody's vegetables that they plant in the community garden. This is an example of what we have done all up and down Main Street in Nyack. So we have a lot of different garden beds all up and down Main Street. You can see in the before picture what they looked like originally. They were just underutilized natural spaces. These garden beds that had maybe 1 or 2 plants in them, we filled them out with all these native pollinator-friendly flowers. And so now you can, walk up and down Main Street and just see all the pretty flowers. This particular stretch is where you walk from Main into the parking lot that has the farmers market on Thursdays. This is one of our projects that's pretty near and dear to my heart. This is over at the Nyack Plaza. They're on Depew in Nyack. They're low-income housing. We did 2 large pollinator gardens for them. This is the one by their senior center. So you can see from the before picture compared to the after picture, we didn't reinvent the wheel here. We just, again, reduced the lawn, carved out more of that turf grass, got rid of it, replaced all those annuals that you can see in the before picture with perennials. You can't see very much, but we did the opposite side, on the other side of all of those, of their big shrubs that they have there too. We added a few other plants over by their building as well. So now when you walk outside of the senior center, and this is really nice because a lot of people that live there will come out in the summertime and sit by on that little low wall in the sunshine. And now it's just this lovely pollinator habitat with all these butterflies, and it's really pretty great. And we did another huge garden for them on in front of one of their other buildings on the opposite side of the street. If we have time, I will run through a few of my favorite pollinator plants. Are we doing okay on time? Brianna,
Dana, we have time. If you want to go through it, yeah.
Okay. So I'll go through. I find this useful because I find some people, want to plant things, but there's always that question, what to plant. So I put together a list. Not only are most of these plants pretty easy to find in regular nurseries, some of them you can even find, like at Home Depot or Lowe's, but these plants, with few exceptions, and I'll let you know the exceptions, my deer don't eat. Now, I can't vouch for your deer, but I can tell you that there is some deer resistance to these plants. Okay, so let's start off with bee balm. Bee balm. This is just a fantastic pollinator plant. It's very easy to find. You can find these bee balm in regular nurseries. You can find it at Home Depot. Lots of different species of bee balm, all of them native, very beneficial. They smell great. If you put them in an area where they're happy, they usually like full sun. They will spread a little bit, but like in a good way. They're an easy mix with other flowers. Just a great pollinator garden plant. Same with anise hyssop. This is also an easy plant to find. Has this nice upright, cylindrical habit. Likes full sun. This plant is also very drought tolerant. Can really handle dry areas. So it's a plant to be thinking about with, now that we're in a little bit of a drought. So if you're looking for something to plant in an area that is pretty dry, this is one that will do pretty well. And yeah, deer don't eat it. Tick seed. I really like tick seed a lot. There's lots of different species of tick seed. They're pretty easy to find in nurseries. Deer don't eat most of them. This one, I think, is the cultivar Zagreb. I know deer don't eat this one. Is pretty happy little flowers, you know, in early summer. The thing I like a lot about tick seed is that when you're creating a pollinator garden, sometimes I find it hard to find plants that are of shorter stature. You know, it's somewhat easy to find good pollinator plants that grow to like 3 or 4 feet tall, but finding some that can go in the front of your border because you'd like to put shorter plants in the front and taller plants in the back so you can see everybody. Sometimes it could be harder to find some shorter plants that are good pollinator plants, but tick seed really fits that bill. A lot of tick seed species only grow to about 2 feet. So yeah, like tick seed a lot. Milkweed. Milkweed is the host plant for the monarch butterfly. And as the plight of the monarch has become more and more well known, more and more people have been going to nurseries and saying, you know, do you have any milkweed? I want to buy milkweed. And so nurseries have started carrying it pretty regularly. There's several different kinds of milkweed. The two that you'll have the easiest time finding are the two on the top. The one on the left with the orange flowers is, the common name is butterfly weed. So its common name is not milkweed, it's butterfly weed, but it is a milkweed. Great plant, grows to about 2 feet, lovely orange flowers, and it will spread itself around, you know, if it's somewhere where it's happy. And the other one right next to it at the top with the pink flowers is swamp milkweed. And also both of those two are pretty easy to find in regular nurseries. Great plants. The milkweed on the bottom picture is common milkweed, and you would need to seek out common milkweed from a native plant nursery. It can get very tall, so you know, be careful where you choose to plant it. I've found that common milkweed moves itself around a lot pretty naturally. Like, for instance, we have milkweed that's growing in a lot of our garden beds on Main Street, but I've never planted any of it. It just sort of shows up. You know, the birds spread it around, or the seeds blow by wind. I'm not sure which, but it tends to move itself around pretty naturally, and I always welcome it when I see it sprouting up somewhere. Joe Pye weed, this is another personal favorite, and it's getting easier and easier to find in regular nurseries. This is a picture of the straight species Joe Pye weed. It does get very tall, like 7 feet tall. So if you want to put this in your garden, just be careful where you put it, but it just erupts into these, you know, globes of pink blossoms in the middle of summer. Great plant. The ones that you can find in regular nurseries these days are the dwarf cultivars. So if you want to include this plant, there are these shorter cultivars that you can buy these days. Those are usually the ones I've seen in regular nurseries. They're called like Little Joe or Baby Joe. They grow to maybe 4 feet tall or 5 feet tall. You know, it's still a tall plant, but a great addition to any pollinator garden. Okay, this plant is my MVP. It's my all-star. I can't even, like, sometimes I talk about this plant and I get almost teary because I love it so much. Now, this plant, you are not going to be able to find in a regular nursery. You're going to have to seek it out from a native plant nursery. This is mountain mint, Pycnanthemum muticum. It is not related to spearmint or peppermint. Don't buy any other mint. Seek out this plant. The amount of different pollinators that you will see on this plant when it is in bloom is just amazing. You won't be able to name them all. The other thing I love about this plant is that it blooms at a time of year when very little else is blooming. We have a dearth of flowering plants here in the Hudson Valley in the middle of summer. It takes place from, I say it's from when the clover stops blooming to when the goldenrod starts. So that's usually like the beginning to the middle of July to the end of August. It's strange because, you know, it's the middle of summer. So I think for us as people, we think, oh, it's the middle of summer. Surely pollinators have plenty to forage on. There's plenty blooming. There's actually not a lot blooming. The trees have stopped blooming by then. And there's not that many perennials that bloom during that time. Mountain mint blooms throughout that entire dearth. I love it so much. So you do have to find this at a native plant nursery, but it is worth the extra effort to seek it out. This is another big favorite of mine, big favorite. Another one you will need to seek out from a native plant nursery, golden ragwort, Pachyra aurea. This is a spring bloomer. It blossoms in the spring, like April, long bloom time, beautiful yellow flowers. And then for the rest of the year, it's like this nice little ground cover. It's very unfussy. It likes a lot of different conditions, sun, shade, wet, dry. It's totally fine. It looks great planted in big swaths of it. So you get, just tons of those yellow flowers coming up in the spring. Pollinators love it. It blossoms at a time of year when they really need it. So yeah, again, seek it out from a native plant nursery. Okay, goldenrod and the other plant I'm going to talk about, aster. I feel like these two plants are one of the best things about living in the Northeast. Goldenrod blossoms now in the fall. I'm sure you've seen it. It is such an important pollen and nectar source for pollinators in the fall. So is aster. Goldenrods are, I think technically they're all annuals, but they reseed very readily, so you can plant them like perennials. Beautiful, golden colors. There's lots of different kinds of goldenrod. Deer don't eat them. You can find some of their cultivars in regular nurseries now. Like there's a cultivar called Fireworks that's pretty easy to find in regular nurseries. Goldenrod has a unfair and untrue reputation as causing fall allergies. It does not cause fall allergies. Goldenrod pollen is very heavy. It does not carry on the wind. The plant that causes fall allergies is ragweed. It is not goldenrod. So you can plant goldenrod in your yard and don't worry, it's not going to make you sneeze in the fall. And it does look so lovely with asters planted along with it. They blossom at the same time. Asters, are usually blue and purple in color, although there's white asters, pink asters. There's a bunch of different asters to choose from. I think most, if not all, are native. There are some that deer will eat. So, I've grown New York aster and New England aster in my yard, and my deer ate them to nubbins, but I've got a cultivar growing right now of October skies. They've left that alone. I've got a couple other asters that come up naturally that they've left alone. I think for you, it's just you're gonna have to do some trial and error and see what they eat, what they don't eat. But this is a great combination for a fall pollinator garden, is goldenrod and aster. And I threw in one vine here. This is one of my favorite vines. It's a native vine, trumpet honeysuckle. This is not Japanese honeysuckle. Japanese honeysuckle is invasive, but trumpet honeysuckle is our native honeysuckle. It has these lovely ombre flowers that go, from like a red to a pink, little yellow centers. It attracts a lot of hummingbirds. This is a plant that wants full sun and it wants to climb. So it needs, a fence or a trellis or something behind it so it can climb. But it's just a great native vine. And then if anyone wants to take pictures of these slides, I can also share the slides with you later. But if you're looking for native plant nurseries, we don't have any in Rockland County, but there are several that are very close to us. So yeah, I recommend taking a picture of this. There's also there is a native plant sale that the Cornell Cooperative Extension of Rockland puts on in the spring. You can find that there at the bottom. They have a website for it. And then there's a native plant center over in Westchester Community College. They put on 2 plant sales in the spring and in the fall. I recommend both of them. And then, yeah, those other 4 nurseries that I've listed at the top are nurseries that are all within about an hour to an hour and a half drive of where we are, that are great places to visit. And if you don't want to drive to a native plant nursery, you also have the option to order native plants online. There's lots of great native plant nurseries that are online these days. These are 3 that I've used pretty regularly, that I've gotten great plants from. Toadshade is just down in New Jersey. It's not far from us. I think both Prairie Moon and Prairie Nursery are in the Minnesota, I think. I can't quite remember, but great plants that you can get from any of these places. So ordering online is also an option. That's it, you guys. So let's all go out and start unpaving the way.
Gee, Dana, thanks very much. Very informative. Oh God. It is certainly a subject near and dear to me, and something that we've been working on
Good.
for quite a while. I'm sure, does it, I mean, I could pick your brain for quite a while. Does anybody have questions?
I have a question.
Sure.
So first off, I loved your presentation and the projects that you've done in Nyack.
Thank
You have mentioned that your organization is primarily run by volunteers. What is like the busiest season for your like volunteer events?
Spring and fall.
Okay.
Spring and fall. Those are the 2 times of year that it's best to plant plants. So, you know, we compile our planting projects during those 2 times of year.
Okay.
And that's when we need volunteers. So for instance, I just finished 4 planting days throughout mid-September to mid-October. So every weekend we had a planting day, planting a new area, new planting project.
Yeah, that's amazing. Question, how late in the spring do your volunteer events go?
It's kind of weather dependent. You know, I like to have everything planted by the month of May, you know, or within the month of May. But like this year, we planted a garden for the YMCA in Nyack, and we planted that in, I want to say it was almost mid-June.
Okay.
So it's possible. You know, the thing that gets complicated with waiting too long in the spring is if you plant plants and then the temperature really starts to rise, you know, if it really starts to get hot, then you need to have somebody there making sure that the plants stay watered.
Right.
And that can get challenging, you know, because we've had some hot summers.
Mhm.
So yeah, as long as wherever it is that you're thinking of planting, if you've got people, volunteers, employees, whatever, who can keep it watered during the summer, we can plant as late as you want. But yeah, it's a matter of keeping those plants watered.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
So Dana, I've come to find out that Mother Nature is very complicated.
Yes.
and sometimes I think we try and I think in one way it's very good to try and keep it simple, but in another way it's very hard. I'm reminded of a time I was with my wife at a surprise birthday party, and we ended up getting on this type of a subject, and the people sitting next to me were saying they weren't going to take down this vine. There were bees all over it. And then I started questioning them and like, what does it look like? It ended up being porcelain berry.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So what is your, I guess, what's your take on this kind of stuff with, there's invasives and then there's bad invasives and then there's, so hard to, I've tried to come up with a way of, as you said, this is an extremely important topic. So we need to save our pollinators. But I don't know if, for example, we should rely strictly on volunteers for all of this. It seems to me like at some point in time, towns, villages, cities, businesses, something needs to happen where we get some educated people that know what they're doing that can kind of watch this stuff.
I agree. Yeah, I agree completely. There's, you know, certainly a grassroots effort will make a difference, but unless we get our governments involved and start making this stuff more of a policy, you know, it won't be sustained. You know, we need all of that kind of regulation as well. Now, with a lot of different state, you know, departments of highways, they have policies now that whenever they're doing like restorative work, you know, around public roads and stuff, that they only plant native species. You find a lot of that in different states. In Nyack, we have a policy where, you know, anything that's being replanted, we're supposed to use native species as well. But, you know, again, there's not always oversight. So yeah, but we do need some, yeah, laws and regulations and more education on this topic. I'd love to talk to like the Rockland legislature and just kind of do this presentation, kind of point out the reasons why this stuff is important.
Yeah, I don't, sometimes I hate to think that government is the only option, because I think this topic too also sells itself.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we feel that if you're doing something that benefits the environment in one way, it's almost, oh, we must be suffering something, or something must be, some kind of negative connotation must be with it. And instead of thinking of nature as in our backyard, it seems like nature has to be something like the Adirondacks.
Yeah.
Right. It needs to be a destination where we need to kind of change. We need to kind of change the way people think in a way.
Yeah, I completely agree. You know, I think that there are people that think that, you know, oh, our national parks, our state parks, or whatever, you know, that's where all the space for pollinators is. We have plenty of space, you know, for all these different species. And the truth is, those areas are actually very, very small. You know, there's no way that they can support, you know, all of these different species in the numbers that we need them to be. So yeah, but I do feel that there is a sea change happening. I feel like there are more and more people that are seeking out native plants, that are going to nurseries and asking for native plants, that are asking nurseries, you know, where do you grow your plants? Do you use neonicotinoids, you know, when you grow your plants? I feel like a lot of that is changing. You think about how things were several years ago, there wasn't as much awareness, and now I see, I meet a lot more people that are aware, you know, of this topic and are seeking out native plants, and yeah, plants grown without pesticides, and it's becoming more and more of a prevalent thing.
Definitely. Years ago, you had a hard time finding a native plant, let alone a native plant grower.
Yeah.
And now there's a few of them. You've got some options.
There's a lot, and these native plant nurseries that I go to, I mean, they're doing quite well. Their natives are selling. You know, they want this stuff. They want this stuff in their yard. So yeah.
Yeah, Kathy Hochul just signed the bill to ban neonics. So that's right. So that's coming down. So yeah, I totally agree. This is a movement that's got some traction that hopefully will continue. I'm again just concerned. It's complicated. So what's your take on maintenance and keeping these things? Our biggest problem by far is invasives.
Yeah,
definitely seeing, you know, doing your planting is just the first step. Then keeping them in check is another. So how do you handle the maintenance in your pollinator pathways?
All gardens require maintenance. You know, that's just how it is. And like I mentioned in the presentation, the fight against invasives is constant and never ending, you know, and that's just how it's going to be. So yeah, wherever we're doing a planting project, if we're doing it for say like a private company or something, I make sure that there is a plan for ongoing maintenance before we'll even put in the garden. You know, if you don't have a plan for maintenance, then you shouldn't put in the garden, because that is the most important step. I do some of the maintenance on our gardens myself. I also have volunteers that I can call on. And in Nyack, I'm very lucky. I have a lot of support from the village and a lot of support from the DPW. So they help a lot with things like watering, you know, and mulching, or if I need help with a particular planting day, they've been there and they've been great. So definitely maintenance is an issue, I look at this kind of stuff as, you know, there's potential for a lot of job creation here. You know, as we move forward into having to think about these public spaces, these public natural spaces, including more pollinator habitat, there's this potential for creating jobs for people to maintain those spaces, you know, to have that expertise, to know how to go and remove invasives and keep everything healthy. So I'm hopeful, but we'll see.
Yeah, again, I think this is certainly a movement for sure. So here's another question that I've hacked around for a while is, how do you measure progress? How do you measure? How do you have any way of measuring if you go out, and do you actually do any kind of counts or anything during the time of the year?
Well, we keep a native plant counter on our website. So we keep track of every native plant, you know, planted throughout the Nyacks, not only that we've planted, but anyone who joins the pathway, you know, can tell us how many native plants they've planted since 2019. It all goes into that number. I think right now it's over 4,000. There's actually quite, I need to add the numbers of the plants that we planted in our fall planting project, but I think that bumps us over 4,000. And then, you know, our map, you know, we keep track of all the various businesses and private homeowners that have joined the pathway. I wish I had time to do something like, you know, counting number of pollinators visited to certain gardens and things like that, but I don't have time to go around to all of our gardens and spend time doing that. It's quite time-consuming work. But I can certainly say from just like the visuals of walking around town and seeing our gardens, I see so many more pollinators, you know, on these plants that were ever there before. So, yeah.
Dana, this is Lori Seaman. Hi.
Hi.
I know you did a project with Joanna and some of our people at Marydale.
Yeah, that was several years ago. Yeah.
Would you give a talk like this? We have a network of educators and parents, and all. It'd be great to have you come and do this. Would you?
I'd love to. Yeah, absolutely.
Do you have people look at your video? Like do you have a recording of this, or do you like to come out and directly talk with people?
Well, there's a couple of options. I don't have a recording of this presentation, but I'm happy to do it. If you are looking for just like I did produce a video. It's just like 2 minutes long that kind of overview, you know, gives an overview of the problem and then what we're trying to do, you know, to solve, you know, to help pollinators through this little 2-minute video. So if you're looking to kind of give someone an overview of what I'd be talking about or why this is an issue, that I can give you a link to that video. But yeah, certainly I'm happy to come talk.
I'm thinking of posting something, creating an event around it.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll talk to you then.
Absolutely. Yeah, let's talk separately. Sure.
We have an interested audience, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So Matt, I just wanted to do a quick time check. So we had slotted off until 12 p.m. For the meeting. I just wanted to make sure we can continue doing questions if that works. We had a couple other items on the agenda, Matt. I don't think there's anything else we have to get too much into, but what are you thinking?
Yeah, and we need to make sure that we acknowledge everybody's time, appreciate it, everything. So we should make it 12 o'clock a stop. But did anybody else have more questions for Dana? Again, I really want to thank you, Dana, for everything you do. We're working with, right now I'm at Sleepy Hollow Country Club over in Westchester. So we're working with Chet. We're trying to get Chet over
nice.
here.
Oh,
Yeah.
He's wonderful. Yeah, he's just great.
I met him when we were over in Rockland and have touched base with him and trying to get him here. So we're gonna try and join your organization shortly.
Yes, do it. Well, thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate it. And yeah, you have my contact information. Feel free to reach out with anything you need.